Hi everyone, welcome to the final webinar in our KYC Beginner to Pro for Merchant Acquirers series, How to Pick a KYC Automation Vendor That's Right for You. This session has been pre-recorded, but our speakers are available via live chat for any questions you have in real time, so please feel free to reach out during the presentation. I'm going to give another minute for those who are still logging in, so please sit tight and then we'll get things going. Hi again, everyone. For those who are just joining us, welcome to the third and final webinar in our summer series, KYC Beginner to Pro for Merchant Acquirers. My name is Jessica, and I'll introduce today's session and will join you again to close things out at the end. Before we begin, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. In your GoToWebinar panel, you will find a copy of our presentation deck and links to some resources. I'd like to draw your attention to our newest guide titled Tailor Your Merchant Portfolio, How to Leverage KYC to Find the Right Client Fit. You will also want to download our most popular guide titled Automated KYC Due Diligence, 10 Tips for Getting It Right. Make sure to check those out before the session is over. Please be reminded that the information provided today is not a legal opinion and should not be relied upon as such. The opinions shared are those of the speakers personally. If you've missed any part of our series, here's a quick recap. Our first webinar, Know Your Customer, Anatomy of a Bad Actor, covered how to identify quality, revenue-generating accounts while eliminating fraud. The second session, Automated KYC, ROI You Can't Afford to Ignore, looked at KYC analytics and metrics, including an ROI calculator to make the business case for investing in KYC automation. Today's webinar will address the final stage of choosing a vendor and how to get started. We have some great industry experts lined up to present today. First, we have Alan Primitivo. Alan has been with G2 for the past 11 years, during which he has held various leadership roles from operations to client services. Next, we have Matthew Parker. Matt is a 22-year payments industry veteran who for the past 15 years has helped merchant acquirers automate onboarding, underwriting, and KYC business processes. Matt is a co-founder and principal of KYC SiteScan. Thank you so much to both of our speakers. For today's agenda, we'll open with a brief recap of the case for automating KYC, and then we'll move into why do it now, which turns out to be a key question that informs the criteria for finding a vendor. And finally, in keeping with the title of the webinar, we'll cover how to pick a KYC automation vendor that's right for you. While our agenda is broken into sections, rather than have our speakers each cover a separate topic, today's session will be more of a discussion between our presenters. With that, I'll hand it off to Alan, who, as it turns out, has stood in your shoes, actually conducting manual KYC due diligence.
Thanks, Jess. And again, welcome to all of you joining us today. The reason you're looking at blueberry scones is because I ate a lot of them back in my days of doing manual KYC. So many roles, many years ago, I was in charge of our KYC program here at G2. It was me and one other person, and we had to review merchant data sets ranging from a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand. As many of you on this call can attest, doing that many manual lookups in such a small amount of time and being accurate is pretty tough. Moving on from my background to today's agenda, we know you're ready to tee off your KYC automation project. But first, we want to start with a brief review of why you should automate KYC. I'd like to kick off the discussion by digging a bit more into the problem. Matt, could you talk to us a little bit about merchant expectations and how that influences the need for KYC automation?
Certainly, Alan. There's the merchant who is the applicant for the acquiring account. Very often, it's not just the merchant. Very often, there's another very important stakeholder, and that is the salesperson bringing the merchant to the acquirer. And you want to keep both of those stakeholders happy. The merchant, of course, is going to be your customer, but the ISO or the salesperson is your sales channel, bringing you not just this merchant, but hopefully a lot of other merchants. And so speed is very important. The ability to quickly underwrite a merchant is critical. And in my 15 years of doing onboarding and underwriting, I've seen the time frame for expectations around underwriting a merchant go from a couple of days to 1 day to sub-hour to sometimes 10 or 15 minutes. So being able to automate the more time-consuming processes of the underwriting process, which usually is the KYC due diligence process on the merchant, is critical.
Great. And as part of level setting everyone on the call, it would be great if we could briefly run through the nuts and bolts of KYC. Matt, could you walk us through the why, what, and how of KYC due diligence?
Sure. Well, KYC, know your customer due diligence on the merchant, is research on the merchant, understanding who you're doing business with, who you're onboarding. It is a requirement that the card brands have, that your acquiring bank has, if you're an ISO, that your acquirer has. So it is a compliance requirement. However, even if it wasn't a compliance requirement, you probably would want to perform a certain amount of KYC on the merchant to make sure that you're not dealing with someone who's fraudulent or criminal, or who's going to cause reputational damage to your company or your brand. So the why should you do KYC is you want to understand that you're not bringing a bad actor into the payments ecosystem. So you want to make sure that the business is legitimate. You want to look for signs of fraud. And you certainly want to understand what that merchant is selling, because every acquirer has different criteria about the types of business they want to have in their portfolio and what they want to keep out. So that is the why. The what of know your customer due diligence is understanding that the bad guys that are out there, they are stealing other companies' identities and posing as them. So that's called corporate identity theft. They're ripping off consumers and stealing money from them and not delivering products or services. And then there's also the sort of sketchy, on the edge merchant who has maybe very dubious product claims or service claims. And so you want to understand that before you bring that into your portfolio. And the how to do it is you're looking, of course, at the merchant application, but you're comparing that data that the applicant is giving you with third-party data that you acquire through various methods. Sometimes it's going to the merchant's website, sometimes it's going to secretaries of state, other governmental databases like Federal Trade Commission, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, other databases where people can complain about ripoff or unscrupulous merchants. There are proprietary and commercial databases out there about businesses that you can trust, such as Better Business Bureau in the United States. And of course, now that everything is online, a lot of data is moved online. So negative news and information can very often be found through things like Google searching, mapping of business locations to verify that someone is giving you a real location rather than a PO box. So there's a lot more to KYC, but at a very high level, it's just understanding that who you're doing business with is legitimate and that they fit in your portfolio criteria.
Exactly. And I think everyone on this call knows the incredible amount of work manual KYC due diligence takes, and automation in any field has big benefits. So Matt, would you take a moment to talk more specifically about why KYC is the first and the best place to automate within the boarding process?
Yeah, for those who are looking to automate the entire onboarding process, from the merchant application process to the gathering of data to the KYC piece to the decisioning piece, that has a lot of moving parts to it. But very often when people are starting to move away from, companies are starting to move away from doing everything completely manual to starting to automate those processes, KYC is sort of the low-hanging fruit. It gives you the most efficiency lift in the quickest way. You can get onboarded with an automated KYC solution in less than 1 business day, including getting your people trained. And that will just save a huge amount of time and effort. So rather than people in the underwriting department spending 90% of their time aggregating all of this know your customer due diligence information, they can spend their time analyzing that information. Because right now, if you're doing both manually, you're spending about 90% of the time just getting that data, manually going to all those websites and scraping and gathering that information. When you automate that process, that very laborious, slow, expensive, time-consuming process, you can scale tremendously with the same number of people. So when companies are looking to start that automation journey, very often KYC is the first logical step to take. There's almost no software development needed. It's all software as a service, and it's just maybe half an hour of configuration, and you're off and running. And you get probably the greatest return on investment as well.
And Matt, going back to my previous roles a couple of years ago, I would say, spending the majority of my time doing data aggregation was absolutely correct. That was the bulk of our time. And the data analysis piece is the piece we wanted to spend more time on, but we just couldn't. And then once we started to integrate automation, you could almost flip those stats on its head, and we were able to spend more time looking at data analysis, looking at trends, and seeing what's happening across the market. And that was only available when we started automating.
Exactly. You want the people doing what people are good at, which is
Right.
making decisions, analyzing data, looking at corner cases or gray areas and making decisions. It's better to let the machines do the rote, boring, grunt work tasks. It also keeps your people happier. Nowadays, it's hard to find, train, retain, and supervise good employees, especially in the era that we're in right now. So automating all of that grunt work not only is a huge efficiency lift, but it also keeps your people happy that they're doing the interesting work and not the grunt work.
Yeah, exactly. And once we had that piece in place, there was a huge morale boost amongst the team. So absolutely. So moving on to the next section of our agenda, it's all well and good to know that automating is a good idea and that you'll do it someday. But the question is, why now? Why are we even taking the time to attend this session? Matt, you were the first to bring up the front burner analogy. Could you please expound on why now is such a critical question?
Sure, Alan. The front burner analogy just reminds me of, and I think everyone lives this way, especially if you're working Monday through Friday or even longer. You have your to-do list, your task list, things, there are things that are more higher priority, things get backburnered, you still want to pay attention to them, but they're backburnered. So when does KYC automation come to the front burner? I've seen it really in two ways. Number one is your sales team or your business development people just landed a big deal and with a new partner, new sales channel, and great news, the company is going to be tripling its onboarding volume, or quadrupling, or quintupling.
Correct.
And everyone's high-fiving and excited about that, and the operations people are sort of also excited about it, but they're also looking on in slight horror about
Right.
how do that. We're at our limits right now with the number of people we have. How are we going to scale to meet that volume? So that's very often when it becomes very much a front burner issue and one of the higher priorities, at least for the operations staff. The other time that I've seen it move from a nice to have feature, KYC automation, to a must have feature is if your company has decided that now is the time to automate the whole onboarding and underwriting process, because unless you've automated the know your customer process, you cannot automate the entire onboarding and underwriting process. At a certain point in that process, you will need to revert back to a manual method and everything will get bottlenecked again. So a lot of companies, when they make that decision, we're scaling, we're growing, we need speed, we need all of the positive benefits that come with automating onboarding and underwriting, they realize, oh, KYC is an important component of that process. And so that's when they start reaching out and trying to understand what the requirements are and what the features they need are and the data they need, and then they start looking for vendors.
So the answer to why automate KYC processes now really comes down to what your goals and needs are. Matt, as we prepared for this presentation, you told me an interesting story about what you thought people would need versus what their real priorities turned out to be. If you don't mind sharing that, could you expand?
Sure. So I've been doing onboarding and underwriting automation for about 15 years. That led me into know your customer automation because, as I just mentioned, you can't fully automate onboarding and underwriting unless you've automated the KYC process. It's a very important facet of the underwriting process. So when I first got into it about 11 years ago, I started thinking to myself, not just, what is the product going to look like and what is it going to deliver and how are we going to deliver it and all those things, but I was thinking about the benefits. What are the benefits to the customer of implementing this product and service? And I thought then it would be cost because KYC is very costly. You need to pay pretty highly educated and well-trained people to do it, and that costs business a lot of money. So I thought cost would be the number one reason. I also thought quality and consistency would be very close behind that. One of the reasons is one of our very first clients was fined $1 million by Visa for inadequate KYC, and they were desperately looking to improve the quality and consistency of their KYC. So I thought that was those were the two drivers. I didn't think speed and scale would be. In reality, it was actually all of those benefits were true, but it was the exact opposite. What I see on a day-to-day basis working with clients in the industry is usually scale is what drives people to automate, and that is the largest benefit they get out of it. Speed is very important to scale because when you scale, you can speed. It's very hard to increase your speed if you're not scaling. So those are those are tied together, and it's getting very competitive out there. The days have changed. When it took like 2 or 3 days to onboard and underwrite a merchant, now if you can't do it in a couple of minutes, the salesperson is wondering what's going on with their deal, and the merchant might actually get approved by someone else. They might not be just applying to you for a merchant application. It might be the early bird gets the worm. So scale and speed are really the two main drivers, I think, just around not just KYC automation, but underwriting automation. Of course, quality is important too, and when you do that, you get the consistency and the quality. Cost comes into play usually at the last piece. Usually there's a CFO behind the scenes somewhere. So when you made the decision that the company needs to do this, we need to automate not just KYC, but maybe also onboarding and underwriting, you need to eventually make an ROI pitch to your CFO, and she's going to look at that and say, well, how is this different from what we're doing today?
Yeah, and Matt, if I may chime in, and being in my role these days and everyone on my team, when we're talking to clients, when I'm talking to clients, usually it is more around speed and scale. And once we start to answer those types of questions, the cost question comes in towards the end, right? Like, great, you're able to fulfill what I need in terms of scaling and speed and quality, as you mentioned, kind of dovetails off all of that. Because if you're able to have a process that is automated, where you're taking that human element out, the quality is going to go through the roof. And kind of being in this role and hearing all the discussions are happening, it truly is scale and speed for all of the clients that we're talking to.
Definitely, that tends to drive it. However, the other two big issues, quality, you can't scale and speed if the quality is not going to be as good as doing it manually. And the good news is with automation, it's as good and sometimes better because let's face it, people get tired, especially if they're doing the same repetitive tasks over and over and over again. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're thinking picking up the kids or making dinner or doing whatever you do for that evening. And if you're doing a very repetitive task, that's just human nature. It's going to slip. The machines do it perfectly every single time, and it's auditable. And cost does come into play. Like I said, the CFO is going to be looking at it. The CEO is going to be looking at it. It has to cost at least the same amount as what you're paying today doing it manually, or less. The good news is it's almost always less.
Exactly. And you're right about the KYC automation drivers. And I'd like to add one more to your list. An important thing that pulls KYC automation projects from the back burner to the front is automated underwriting, which you can see here. I'm not exactly sure which is my lower right, but it goes like this. So you can implement KYC automation without having automated underwriting in place. But if you want to automate your merchant decisioning, then the KYC piece is a prerequisite. So the KYC data is required for the auto decisioning rules to function. And for those of you on the call who are already G2 clients, in this diagram, you're very familiar with the last box on the top row. Most of you engage G2 for persistent merchant monitoring and transaction laundering detection, but you may not have known that you could integrate KYC automation as part of a tech stack to support the end-to-end lifecycle. And with that, it's time to move on to the heart of the matter. So you're ready to pull the trigger, but how do you select a vendor?
So the criteria for selecting a vendor is really specific to individual companies. What I would do first, if I were the client looking to automate KYC, is I would look at what my needs are. I might want to talk about it with my acquirer or acquiring bank to make sure I have all the features that I need. So, if you're doing a lot of e-commerce, then website crawling and scraping and analysis of a merchant's website and how they're selling things online is going to be very important to you. If you're doing mostly brick and mortar or micro merchants without websites, the website crawling is important still, but maybe less important to you. Where you're doing business is absolutely critical. So, are you just in the United States, or are you just in the EU, or are you in the APAC region? The world is still a very siloed place when it comes to data, where to get information about companies. So understanding the geography of where you want to do business will, I think, help lead your decision on which KYC automation vendor to go with. Features are important. Which data sets do you need? Do you need watch list screening, PEP screening? Do you need social media? Do you need specific data sources like MasterCard Match? So understanding what your requirements are really important, and then comparing that to the features that the various KYC vendors offer is important. Another thing I think is a white box versus black box choice. White box means that the data that you get is very obvious to you. Where is this information coming from? There's no sort of shell game going on. There are vendors out there who will give you a score or a risk rating. The problem with that is you don't know exactly how they're coming up with that score or risk rating. So different companies are more comfortable with white box, but some people like the black box solution as well. Technical integration, I think, is a really important piece as well, especially if you're going to be integrating your KYC with broader processes. Maybe you want to integrate it with your CRM package. Maybe you want to integrate it into enrollment and underwriting, and of course G2 for persistent monitoring. So the integration points and how easily can it be integrated, that's usually done via API, application programming interface. So it's important to understand a vendor's technical ability around there. I think one of the more important things, and Alan, I think you do client service every single day. I know because I work with you doing this. I believe a real differentiator is client service. Automating KYC is great, but there are times where you need to speak with the vendor and understand what the results are, get your training, get your support. Maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, since, being on both sides, right? The operation side, the client services sides, I know the value of being able to write an email, pick up a phone, and talk to a person, right? Someone who is an expert in that field. And, having that support and couple that with the automation piece, you really are able to have the best of both worlds, right? You get the speed you need and the quality. While also, if you are ever find yourself in a moment where you need to understand a little bit more, you're able to email, pick up a phone, schedule a meeting, and then talk to someone, either myself, someone on the team, and we could help you understand a little bit more about your question, right? We could expound on it, we could provide more detail if we have it, and like you mentioned, if you have new team members and they need to learn more about the process, we're here to provide additional training or refreshers and so on. So if having both that piece of automation and having people there who are dedicated to you as a client is fantastic. And we're set up where each client gets their own client service manager, so they really become an extension of our clients.
Exactly. I think that's a huge differentiator. Automation is great, but there are those 1 or 2% of times where you need to reach out and get some support.
Right, exactly. So I know we covered a lot of territory in such a short time. So doing a brief recap, you have your goals, which helps you determine what you need. And then that helps determine the data, which helps determine the features you need. And all of that helps drive you to find a KYC partner to help you with your automation. So I just wanted to thank you, Matt, for joining me today to discuss KYC automation and for lending your expertise for this entire series.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I'm not sure how I got involved in KYC as my primary business, but it's a great field to be in. We're sort of the good guys in a way. We're trying to keep the payment ecosystem clean, and we're trying to help customers run their businesses well and efficiently. So I'm proud of what we do, and I just see the move to automated systems for not just for efficiency, but just to help businesses scale. We've all gone through a lot in the past year or so, and they're all about scaling at this point, getting back into the normal rhythm of business. And because of the disruption that's been happening, a lot of people are looking for technical solutions to problems. And I think this is a good place to start if you're in the acquiring business and you're looking to begin your automation journey.
Great. Well, thank you, Matt, again. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jess to close things out.
Thank you so much, Alan and Matt, for closing our summer series. If you'd like to learn more, please visit the resources tab on the G2 website. For your convenience, we've shared that link in the chat box of your GoToWebinar panel. If you've missed any part of our summer series, all recordings are available on our website under the Webinars tab. Today's recording will be available for listening within a week. This concludes our session for today. If we did not have time to address your questions during the webinar, we'll follow up with you individually. If you have additional questions or comments, please email us at info@g2llc.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Again, a big thank you to our speakers and to those of you who joined our session. Have a great rest of your day.